Hey everyone, Israel is currently in a war against the terror organization Hamas, and we know how hard it can be to keep up with all the news. So if you haven't had the time to stay on top of the latest developments out of Israel, we're here for you. I'm Ladar Gravelazi, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review.
4 police officers were wounded in a terrorist ramming attack near the central town of Kochav Yair. After striking the group of officers, the suspect drove to the nearby 109 checkpoint where he attempted to stab security forces on site. A guard shot and neutralized the attacker. Police have launched an investigation. The wounded officers were evacuated to the hospital. One of the victims is in serious condition, one was moderately injured, and 2 lightly wounded.
And moving on, Iran is warning of a harsh response after a top Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander was killed in an alleged Israeli airstrike on Damascus. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz has the latest.
The Israeli Air Force allegedly carried out the bold airstrike on a building next to Iran's embassy in the Syrian capital. The blast killed at least 6 people, including top Iranian commander Mohammad Reza Zahedi. Zahedi was the Revolutionary Guard's Quds Force commander, responsible for the unit's operations in Syria and Lebanon, and was the most senior commander of Iranian forces in those countries. Israel has yet to comment or take responsibility for the attack. Iran is warning of a harsh response.
عرض کردم که رژیم میدونه که این نوع اقدامات هیچ موقع بی پاسخ نمونده و قطعا نخواهد.
Israel does not, as a rule, comment on specific strikes in Syria, but has admitted to conducting hundreds of sorties against Iran-backed terror groups attempting to gain a foothold in the country over the last decade. Faced with ongoing attacks by Hezbollah and Shiite militias throughout the Middle East, Israel has escalated its strikes on Iran-linked targets in Syria, killing numerous Revolutionary Guard operatives.
And now in different news, we hear the Israeli delegation has returned from Cairo and are awaiting Hamas's response for a potential hostage deal that would see the release of at least some of the hostages in Gaza. ILTV's Rachel Safdie is here with us in studio. Rachel, what can you tell us about this latest round of talks?
Right, so what's interesting about this latest round of talks is that the delegation made up of Mossad and Shin Bet officials went to Cairo on Sunday after, on last Friday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu approved of their going. And they came back yesterday, on Tuesday, and apparently they have made a proper proposal and accepted to some form of a deal and are awaiting Hamas's response to it. While we don't have any official confirmation on what we might be seeing in this deal, we know from last week after Hamas once again denied another proposal that they've said one of the main aspects they want to see in a potential deal is seeing that Israel will allow Gazans to go back from the south of the Gaza Strip back to the north. And while we know that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was opposed to that, we know that Mossad chief David Barnea wasn't necessarily opposed and said Israel could start being more lenient specifically with that point. So maybe that's what we might be seeing. Also, the Israeli government issued a statement saying that Egypt was a very good mediator in this round of the talks, kind of hinting also that Qatar should be putting more pressure on Hamas to finally accept a deal. So that's what we might be seeing.
Now, we've also heard in the last few days alone some of the horrific testimonies from former hostages that include sexual assault, sexual harassment, of course. What have you been hearing on this front?
Right. So yesterday we saw in the Israeli Knesset 2 released hostages coming. The topic was on the female captives specifically that are currently in Gaza. And one of the released hostages, Maya Regev, she's 21 years old. She was released in the November deal. She said that every single girl that is being captive there has been or is being sexually harassed in some form of way. She gave a chilling testimony. We also heard from Sharon Aloni Cunyo, who was also released with her twin girls that are 3 years old, saying that her husband, David, is still there. Also talking about the importance of the fact that all of the hostages are in such a grave situation, you know, not only the girls. What's also interesting that Maya Regev said is the Knesset is taking a 6-week break now until late May. And she bashed the Knesset and lawmakers and said that she would feel, if she was still in Gaza, that they would be basically, you know, leaving them.
How can they be going on a recess when we're in such a situation?
They're still in Gaza for 180 days. So that's what we heard.
Well, thank you for your insight, Rachel. Certainly, hopefully, we have something to look forward to, and we can see the return of at least some of these hostages who have been in such awful conditions. Hoping for the best. Since the October 7th war, the Houthis in Yemen have fired rockets repeatedly at Israel's southernmost city, Eilat. But yesterday, we saw an escalation from across a different border that surprised many. ILTV's William Sharon has the latest.
On Sunday, a hostile aircraft infiltrated into Israeli territory from Jordan and fell in the city of Eilat. While the aircraft crashed into a building in Eilat, there were no injuries reported. Since October 7th, the attacks on Eilat have come from the Iranian-backed terror group, the Houthis in Yemen, whose activity has disrupted global shipping routes, prompting military responses from the UK and US in recent months. But yesterday's attack was not from the Houthis. It was from the Iranian terror groups backed by the Iranian regime inside Jordan. In recent days, Jordan has been under increasing pressure as tens of thousands of Palestinians have been rioting in the streets. Jordan has accused Hamas of inciting riots and violence within Jordan to increase instability in the Middle Eastern country, which has a long-standing peace agreement with Israel.
And turning to the north, where foreign and Syrian reports say Israel attacked Hezbollah missile depots near Aleppo airport in Syria, killing 38 people and injuring dozens. State media also said simultaneous drone strikes were carried out by insurgent groups. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
Hezbollah is paying a very heavy price in its cross-border exchanges with Israel in Lebanon and also in Syria. Over the weekend, the Syrian army claimed Israeli airstrikes hit near the international airport in Aleppo, causing material damage. Security sources told Reuters that at least 38 people had been killed. Syrian state media claims that the Israeli strikes coincided with drone attacks by insurgents. Israeli strikes reportedly hit Hezbollah missile depots in Aleppo's southern suburb of Jibrin. Hezbollah confirmed that 5 of its members were killed in the attack. Closer to the border, a Hezbollah missile targeted the Israeli border town of Margaliot without causing injury or damage. This after the IDF carried out 3 strikes in the southern village of Taiba. Earlier, an IDF drone targeted a car in Tyre, eliminating the deputy commander of Hezbollah's rocket unit, Ali Naim, in a drone strike. After the latest strikes, Hezbollah announced the names of 6 more members killed.
There was heavy security in Jerusalem this weekend as Israel guaranteed freedom of prayer for all religions amid the war in Gaza. A third straight Friday of Ramadan prayer at Al-Aqsa Mosque atop the Temple Mount in Jerusalem's Old City passed without major incident. This as the Israeli Christian community celebrated Good Friday. More from ILTV's William Sharon.
The Islamic Waqf says 125,000 people took part in the prayers, slightly up from last week. Some 3,000 police have deployed in the capital with strict security checks at entrances to holy sites. There were some minor disturbances. Police say they arrested 11 people in the Old City throughout the day, including several suspects for chanting incitement and support for terrorism following morning prayers. This marked the 3rd consecutive Friday of the Muslim holy month, during which mass prayers took place largely peacefully. This despite fears of disturbances after Hamas terror group had called on Palestinian worshippers to barricade themselves inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This weekend was also Good Friday, celebrated by the Arab-Israeli Christian community. Hundreds of Christians participated in a customary Good Friday procession through the walls of the Old City, commemorating one of the faith's most sacred days when Christians commemorate Jesus' crucifixion. Participants marched slowly, some singing hymns and others carrying crucibles, along the Via Dolorosa, the cobblestone path where tradition says Jesus bore the cross to his crucifixion. Worshippers began the Easter festival with a procession through the Via Dolorosa to the Holy Spectral Church, where Christians believe Jesus was buried before rising from the dead 3 days later.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple.
And joining us now is Rabbi Dov Lipman, former Knesset member and founder and CEO of Yad Le'olim. Rabbi Lipman, thank you for joining. I'd like to discuss the current draft law. We have many international viewers who don't quite understand the source of conflict in this country, as this is an internal issue. Could you briefly explain what is this law? Why is it being renewed, and why the conflict?
Absolutely. So Israel has a mandatory draft law which says that every person, when they turn 18, they must serve in the military. But going back 75 years ago when the state was founded, there were religious communities that felt that they needed to have scholars who were, during these years especially, of ages 18 to 22, 25, that they would be immersed in studying religious texts, become the future rabbis and spiritual leaders of the country. So way, way back, David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister, made a deal with the rabbinic leadership that there could be a few hundred young men who would get military exemptions so that they could study the Torah, the holy texts. But over the course of 75 years, those few hundred have now become over 70,000 young men that every single year are being exempt. And people have petitioned to the High Court in Israel saying this is unfair. There's a lack of equality here. Why should one population be serving in the military and others aren't? And for years, the Supreme Court in Israel has been requiring the Knesset to pass some kind of legislation that provides equality. It might not be drafting all of the ultra-Orthodox young men, but certainly higher numbers than we have at the moment. I'll just add, the recent war and the war we're involved with right now has really exacerbated the problem, because we see that there is a lack of manpower in the army. We do see a need for more soldiers, so that has increased public pressure to try to get the Knesset to actually come to some kind of legislation that suffices the criteria of the court.
That's a great explanation. Thank you. There seems to be a crisis in the coalition now over the renewal of this law. How do you foresee that this will impact the government and the political arena?
So first of all, just to explain the crisis very briefly, the court required by today that there be a solution in place, or else April 1st, there will be a mandatory draft of every single young man, even those who are studying in the rabbinic seminaries, which would lead to a colossal collision of communities and an internal crisis within Israel that we haven't seen really since the state was founded. This is a much bigger one than even judicial reform would be. The government has not come to a solution, so it asked for 24 more hours to come to one. If they don't come to one, which suffices the court, and there will be a mandatory draft, the ultra-Orthodox parties will pull out of the government. That means that Netanyahu no longer has a governing majority, which means either he has to quickly put together some kind of an emergency government, or elections will be called. So for everyone watching overseas, in the midst of this war against Hamas, we have an internal crisis which absolutely, if no solution is found, could lead to the toppling of the government and the initiation of new elections in Israel.
Wow. Now, you've been involved with integration of the ultra-Orthodox sector into the workplace and the army for over a decade. Do you believe that the Haredi population could actually be prompted to serve in the army or in national service? Is there anything that can be done to engage them towards this direction?
I love the way you asked the question, because you asked about the ultra-Orthodox population. I do believe that on a street level, if people were presented with options, some for military service, some for national service, let's remember, in the ultra-Orthodox population, there are already many, many volunteers in the areas of Magen David Adom and Hatzalah and Zaka, organizations that are playing a vital role even in this war itself. Find ways for them to serve where it won't be in the army. Let me just explain for a moment. The concern about the army is you're taking them out of their religious institutions, and now all of a sudden they're thrust at a very young age suddenly into secular society. That's where the fear lies. So first of all, presenting other options for national service, but also in the military. We've worked hard to create units that are exclusively for the ultra-Orthodox, where they have study sessions every day and prayer sessions every day, and their sensitivity to the religious needs. So I do believe, working with the population, there are solutions that can be found. One of the problems is the political leadership, which seems to see their role as preserving the old way that things have been done and not willing to show any kind of compromise on this issue. So I do believe the population is open to it. I believe even many of the politicians are now open to it. We're going to have to see what happens over the course of the next few days and see if a solution can be found, or are we going to actually have a collapse of the government and a crisis in terms of going to elections during wartime, which everyone wants to avoid.
Absolutely. Rabbi Lipman, thank you so much for your analysis today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And the Israeli Knesset has passed a new law that will allow the government to temporarily shut down foreign news agencies operating in Israel that are posing real harm to its national security. The target, the Qatari-owned Al Jazeera network. All the details in the following report.
אני קובע כי הצעת חוק מניעת פגיעת גוף שידורים זר בביטחון המדינה הוראת שעה חרבות ברזל עד תשפ"ד 2024 התקבלה בקריאה שנייה והשלישית ותיכנס לספר החוקים.
The Knesset on Monday evening passed into law a bill dubbed the Al Jazeera Law that grants the government the authority to temporarily shut down foreign news agencies operating in Israel if they are deemed to cause real harm to national security. The vote passed 71-10 in its second and third final readings in the plenum. Following the vote, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is recovering from surgery, said in a statement on X that he would take immediate action to stop the Qatari-based channel's activity in Israel. He said that, quote, Al Jazeera harmed Israel's security, actively participated in the October 7th massacre, and incited against Israeli soldiers. He added it was time to remove the horn of Hamas from our country. Communications Minister Shlomo Kari led the effort to pass the law and said Al Jazeera would be shut down in the coming days. The new law allows for the communications minister to shut down the station for 45 days, after which the request needs to be reapproved. The decision also needs to undergo judicial review, and it is important to note that the law was passed as a temporary law that expires July 31st. The Israeli government had expressed concern over Al Jazeera in the past, but stopped short of taking any measures which might upset Qatar due to its role in the hostage negotiations.
Well, following the massive anti-Israel protests in both London and New York last week, where attendees showed explicit support for terrorist organizations and blatant anti-Semitism, the UK's Metropolitan Police in London are facing increased scrutiny following a viral video of a young woman asking a policeman whether or not a swastika on a sign at an anti-Israel rally was illegal. His response shocked the internet. Let's take a closer look.
Something's likely to cause harassment, alarm, or distress if it is written words, or there's spoken words that are abusive.
So, sorry, under what context is a swastika not disrupting public order? Could you just explain under what symbol that's not disrupting public order?
I haven't said at any point, have I, that it is or it isn't. Everything needs to be taken within context, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it's a context of why does the swastika need context? This is my question. Why is a swastika not immediately anti-Semitism? Why does it need context? This is what I'm confused about. This isn't even about Israel.
It's not anti-Semitic too.
In what context is a swastika not anti-Semitic and disrupting public order? That's just my question.
I don't have an in-depth knowledge of signs and symbols.
Now, here to speak with us about that incident is Joselyn Weiss, the young woman in the video. Joselyn, thank you for joining us today. Now, the officer who you spoke to seemed to have trouble stating that a swastika was indeed anti-Semitic. What was your takeaway from this encounter?
My takeaway was that I think the Met Police is a bit lost. I want to say that they're confused. I think I'm giving them a bit too much courtesy when I say that. What I do know is that they've made statements since that they arrested that guy and that they offered to accompany me immediately to take care of the situation. That was not what happened. They were very dismissive, and they also have not contacted me since to let me know that they arrested the guy. I hope they did. But their response, I was kind of shocked. I just can't believe it happened. I can't believe he actually said those words.
It shouldn't be something so controversial, right? After this video went viral, the Metropolitan Police, as you mentioned, did claim that they arrested the individual and even that they offered to help you. First of all, is that accurate? You claimed at least part of it was not. And second, have you been surprised by the outrage on social media against the police's conduct?
Thank you for asking. I was not surprised by the backlash at all. In the past few months, the Met Police has made multiple statements that chanting jihad is not anti-Semitic, that projecting from the river to the sea on Big Ben is not anti-Semitic. They've made many of these claims of blatantly anti-Semitic things that are not anti-Semitic and need to be taken in context. So I'm not surprised by the backlash in response to this, because the backlash in response to those things was also quite large. I was just shocked that it was a swastika. I didn't think it would get that far. I suppose I shouldn't be that surprised in retrospect, but no, the response did not surprise me at all.
Now we've seen,
and I don't know if they arrested the guy.
We've seen similar trends and in other countries of blatant anti-Semitism, even support for terrorism on the streets. Why do you think that police, whether in the UK or even in the United States, Canada, why are they so reluctant to crack down on this extremism that's so blatantly anti-Semitic?
I think that, again, thank you for the question. I think that what we need to remember is we are halfway through the 2020s, which is crazy. But we started off this decade very chaotically with lockdown, and that was really quite strong policing, and that was curfews and all this sort of stuff. Then the summer of 2020 happened, and there was a huge backlash. And there was a lot of, defund the police have too much power. And so what society has expected from the police as to how they are kept safe, the definition of that is constantly changing, right? And so there is a lot of mixed messaging in that regard. But in particular to this, I think that people right now, what they want is to know that if there are literal terrorists on the street, that the police will protect them. And I don't think that's the message that the police in London have sent today. What I want to tell people in England is that people are seeing this, right? This is what people think of London. And it's a shame because, London is a really wonderful city. And it's a city with a really great and beautiful and thriving Jewish community. And it's not... It doesn't represent London as a whole, but this is the message that the world is seeing. And it's important that people know that so that they can be aware of it. But yeah, I think the message that they're sending in trying to minimize the issue is exactly the opposite of what they should be doing, which is taking responsibility. And again, at the very least, reaching out to me to say, hey, just so you know, we arrested the guy. I'm not exactly hard to get in touch with. So.
Now, it seems that many people in these protests are sort of conflating criticism of Israel with support for terrorism and hatred of Jewish people. What would you like to see from the authorities in many of these Western countries where these protests are taking place to deter this, to push back against this?
Again, thank you so much for the question. What I would like to see, well, first of all, what I would like to say, if they're going to maintain this line of criticizing the Israeli government, I would expect a basic knowledge of civics in regards to this issue. I think most of the people who say, I'm not being anti-Semitic, I'm criticizing the Israeli government, could not define the word Knesset if you asked. I think many of these people probably don't even know that Palestine is two different places. And so I think it's very ironic for them to say, oh, I'm criticizing the Israeli government, when, again, there's a lack of knowledge of anything in regards to Israeli or Middle Eastern politics at all.
Absolutely. Joselyn, I'm so sorry to cut you off, but we are out of time. No. I want to thank you for your courage, also for showing up and for taking part and for taking this policeman to task. Please continue what you're doing and stay safe out there in London.
Thank you.
For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at ILTV.tv or download the ILTV Plus app. That's it for ILTV's weekly review. Stay safe and see you next week.